political tensions in Israel have reached a boiling point once again. The far-right wing factions have increased pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, demanding a tougher and more decisive stance against Hamas. This pressure has intensified just days before the United Nations Security Council meeting scheduled for Sunday, August 10, 2025, which will discuss plans to retake Gaza City. This city has been the epicenter of fierce fighting since the start of the conflict and holds symbolic importance for both sides. The Gaza war has now entered its 22nd month. This prolonged conflict has left deep scars, not only on the battlefield but also within Israeli society itself. The population is divided. Some advocate for a peaceful resolution through a hostage release agreement to end the suffering of families who have waited nearly 2 years. However, on the other hand, the far-right factions demand total victory with no compromise whatsoever against Hamas. Two prominent figures in the coalition government, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, have taken the lead in pressuring Netanyahu. They call for an expansion of military operations, the relocation of Gaza's Palestinian residents, and the construction of new settlements in the area. If these policies are implemented, they are likely to provoke a strong international backlash, including condemnation from Israel's own allies. Netanyahu now faces a complex dilemma. On one hand, he must maintain his government coalition that relies on the far-right support. On the other, he is under the world's scrutiny demanding a halt to violence and a ceasefire for humanitarian reasons. Every step he takes will determine the direction of the Gaza war, Israel's international relations, and even his political future. The political power of the far-right in Israel cannot be underestimated. Over recent years, their influence has steadily grown, especially among voters who feel moderate policies have failed to deliver long-term security. This group believes the only way to ensure Israel's safety is through full control over Gaza and the complete destruction of Hamas capabilities. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir symbolize this hardline stance. Smotrich, known for his fiery rhetoric, insists Israel must redraw the map in Gaza, while Ben-Gvir, a former lawyer known for defending right-wing activists, pushes for a large-scale relocation of Palestinians. These views have sparked intense debate, not only on the international stage but also within Israel's own parliament. Their support comes from voters convinced that Hamas' threat can never be neutralized through negotiations. They view every ceasefire offer as a sign of weakness to be exploited by the enemy. This narrative is amplified by right-wing media outlets that highlight Hamas rocket attacks and emphasize past peace process failures. However, pursuing total victory is not without great risk. A full-scale military operation in Gaza will require enormous resources and may result in significant casualties. International pressure is expected to rise sharply, with threats of sanctions or diplomatic isolation that could harm Israel's global standing. Amidst the heated political dynamics, the voices of hostage families have become one of the most emotional factors in the national debate. They demand the government prioritize the release of hostages before escalating large-scale military operations in Gaza. Some family representatives have openly warned that if hostages are killed during any operation, they will stage protests wherever Netanyahu appears. This group is active beyond media statements, rallying public support through demonstrations in front of the Prime Minister's office, social media campaigns, and meetings with cross-party members of parliament. Their message is clear: the lives of hostages must not be sacrificed for military strategy or political battles. Public opinion in Israel remains divided. Recent polls show a majority favoring efforts to free hostages through negotiation, even if it means a temporary ceasefire. However, a significant percentage agree with the view that only military pressure can force Hamas to surrender. This divide deepens political and social fissures within the country. International media have extensively covered the plight of hostage families. Major news networks share touching personal stories, showing how the conflict is not just a geopolitical issue but a real humanitarian tragedy. For Netanyahu, pressure from hostage families adds another layer of complexity to decision-making. Every policy is now judged not only by military outcomes but also by its ability to protect citizens still held captive by the enemy. International reactions to the recent escalation in Gaza have been swift and severe. The United Nations, through its Secretary General, has expressed deep concern about Israel's plans to expand military operations. The UN stresses that any action worsening the humanitarian situation in Gaza risks violating international law and the laws of war. Several countries, including permanent members of the Security Council, have called for an immediate ceasefire. The United States, Israel's closest ally, has offered limited support for continued military operations but emphasizes the need to protect civilians and ensure humanitarian aid access. Meanwhile, the European Union has issued a stronger statement urging Israel to exercise restraint and pursue diplomatic channels. Middle Eastern countries, including Jordan, Egypt, and Qatar, warn that further attacks will only trigger new waves of violence across the region. Some have even threatened to reconsider diplomatic ties if Israel proceeds with plans to relocate Gaza's population. International humanitarian organizations have also spoken out. Recent reports describe Gaza's conditions as critical, with overwhelmed hospitals, medicine shortages, and thousands of displaced persons lacking adequate shelter. They warn that without a ceasefire, civilian casualties will continue to rise daily. In this complex situation, Netanyahu faces growing diplomatic pressure that could impact Israel's strategic relationships, while domestic pressures from the far-right and hostage families remain unrelenting. The choices made now will shape not only the course of the conflict but also Israel's global standing in the years to come. The humanitarian impact of the Gaza war has now reached alarming levels. Recent data from Gaza's Ministry of Health records over 61,000 Palestinian deaths since the conflict began. This number includes thousands of children and women, with tens of thousands more suffering severe injuries requiring long-term care. Vital infrastructure such as hospitals, schools, and water facilities have been severely damaged or destroyed. On the ground, displacement conditions have worsened. Thousands of families live crowded in emergency tents without sufficient access to food, clean water, or healthcare. Humanitarian organizations report rising cases of infectious diseases, especially in densely populated areas lacking proper sanitation. Power outages have exacerbated the crisis, hindering medical operations and aid distribution. For many Gaza residents, uncertainty dominates daily life. Sirens and explosions are routine. Children lose access to education, while adults face the dilemma of working or safeguarding their families. Fear and trauma shadow almost every step. This situation has sparked global solidarity movements. Protests calling for an end to the war have erupted in major cities like London, Paris, New York, and Jakarta. However, despite mounting international public pressure, policy changes at government levels remain slow. Netanyahu states that the military operations goal is to liberate Gaza from Hamas control. But for many, the humanitarian cost is simply too high. Criticism of Israel's military strategy comes not only from abroad, but also from Israelis concerned about the country's global reputation. Israel's military strategy in Gaza has become a focal point in international security forums. Sources within the government reveal the operation will occur in phases. The first phase focuses on destroying Hamas military infrastructure, including underground tunnels, weapons depots, and command centers. The next phase involves assaults on strategic areas in Gaza City to seize logistical routes and sever enemy supply lines. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, have deployed additional troops along the Gaza border, including infantry units, armored divisions, and air support. Intensive training is underway to prepare for urban combat, known for its high risks. Military commanders acknowledge that fighting in densely populated areas risks significant civilian casualties, necessitating careful tactics to achieve objectives while minimizing humanitarian impact. Meanwhile, Hamas is expected to employ layered defenses, utilizing tunnel networks and guerrilla tactics to slow Israeli advances. Military analysts estimate the battle could last months without an early decisive breakthrough. Netanyahu and the Security Cabinet view total victory as a means to send a strong message to Hamas and other regional actors that Israel will not back down against threats. However, observers warn that a military strategy lacking a clear political and diplomatic plan risks creating a power vacuum in Gaza, which other armed groups may exploit. Given these complexities, the upcoming operation will test Israel's military capabilities and Netanyahu's political resilience amid rising domestic and international pressure. The long-term political impact of the Gaza conflict on Israel is expected to be profound. The nearly two-year war has tested not only military endurance but also Netanyahu's government stability. The coalition, composed of various parties including hardline right factions, grows increasingly fragile due to differing views on how to conclude the war. The far right views the conflict as an opportunity to expand territorial control and affirm Israeli dominance in the region. They push for permanent policies involving new settlements in Gaza and mass displacement of Palestinians. This stance resonates with a voter base convinced that decisive action is the only path to lasting security. However, more moderate parties and some coalition members express concern about diplomatic and economic fallout. International isolation, economic sanctions, and strained relations with key allies like the United States are serious worries that cannot be ignored. Public opinion in Israel also shows signs of war fatigue. Citizens increasingly question the effectiveness of military operations that cost many lives and resources without a clear end in sight. Pressure from hostage families and humanitarian groups adds to the government's burden to find solutions beyond military force. The Gaza conflict is entering a critical phase. Pressure from multiple sides, the far right, hostage families, and the international community, places Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in one of the most challenging positions any Israeli leader has faced. Every decision now will shape his political legacy for years to come. For the far right, total victory over Hamas is seen as a historic step that will secure Israel from future threats. But for the international community and humanitarian groups, such an approach risks greater suffering and damages Israel's global image. Meanwhile, hostage families remind that without a safe resolution for those held captive, military victory means little. In this complex scenario, the conflict's outcome remains uncertain. Should Netanyahu choose the hardline path, he may satisfy his political base but face diplomatic pressure and possible isolation. Conversely, opting for compromise risks losing support at home, especially from factions underpinning his coalition. The big question remains: will the Gaza war end with a clear victory or merely prolong the cycle of decades-long conflict? The answer depends heavily on actions taken in the coming weeks, including the outcomes of the forthcoming UN Security Council meeting.